Good morning again, everybody. There are plenty of seats up front, by the way, for those of you who are coming in. We're going to be talking all about fintech collaboration and what it actually means for the industry and how we can actually take advantage of really, truly embracing the spirit of coming together and building a true ecosystem. My name is Ghela Boskovich. I am with a company called Rainmaking Innovation. We are the parent company of Startupbootcamp, so we see a lot of fintech across all of the verticals in banking. And I have the privilege of seeing all sorts of different models, all sorts of different ideas and changes to what we can do to evolve the products and solutions, but also how to optimize, how to increase the value they actually deliver to the end customer. And I see it across alternative finance and credit scoring to AI and machine learning, not only robo-advisory, but how we can actually augment the experience and customize something to be incredibly specific to an individual customer, meeting their needs. And what payments is going through in terms of the evolution, there was such a massive influx of payment solutions over the last few years. It was one of the first verticals in the industry that had an enormous amount of attention. And now we're dealing with that spillover and how to actually evolve and eat it, right? We built it, we baked it, we set it out on the table, now how do we consume it? And you're gonna have to suffer through some of my thoughts that I'll be sharing today, and then we'll actually have others join us on the stage to share their thoughts in terms of how we operate in this ecosystem. But first of all, let's talk about breaking the payments chains. One of the challenges in terms of the industry that we have is the fact that it's really under threat. So it's under threat from not only the disintermediation via technology, we've got regulation that's disrupting it. We're looking at operational efficiencies that have resulted in diminishing marginal returns, not only from a revenue perspective, but from an ultimate profitability perspective. And how does that allow us to maintain a sustainable industry and a sustainable ecosystem? We've got changing customer behavior, the desire for instant access, the move to mobile, the move to contactless. Very quickly, we actually look for the convenience, and we've addressed that in terms of the customer experience. But we're also looking at a changing investment landscape. Those who have been traditionally pushing the changes in payments are different players now. How does that affect us? So when we look at it, I want to start off with the regulation. My background is a regulatory economist, and so I see it from this perspective more often than not. We've got more of it. We've got more of it, and we should be expecting PSD3 anytime. In fact, discussions are already looking at that because there are so many actually irregularities and things that we couldn't forecast. It's going to be much more complex. And if you understand system theory, which is one of the most wonderful things to study, we start out with such a rigid system. We've moved into something that is incredibly complex, but we're actually pushing it into the tip of chaos. When chaos happens, when there are too many players that don't understand their role, they don't understand the liability or the indemnification problems and the risk models, it all goes back to us trying to revert to a very rigid system and trying to find stasis. So we're balancing on that complex to chaotic system. It's getting a lot more onerous, and basically we're going to be faced with a hell of a lot more regulation. Accept it and make compliance your best friend. It's also the moment we turn compliance into a revenue stream is the moment we change how we see this. And if you can turn compliance, even in payments, into a P&L inside any organization, trust me, you will have unlocked the key to all of this. Let's talk a little bit about PSD2. You're going to clearly be seeing some of the challenges that come up with it. We've been discussing it already for a couple of days. One of the things that actually really concerns me is the fact that there's privacy implications. With the increasing number of third-party providers, there comes a complexity around maintaining the privacy of the customer's data, be it an individual or be it a corporate or SME. Again, faced with diminishing returns, the interesting thing about these sort of complex systems means that the more players that come in, we actually look to pushing into a natural monopoly state. So all of these TPPs that are out there, believe it or not, will go through an M&A series and will actually shrink the number of players in the market. It is a natural monopoly. The barrier to entry is super high in terms of liability, investment, the tech evolution or the evolving aspect of tech. So I'm predicting that there will be fewer TPPs than we actually predict. And the other thing is, data is now the new oil. Data is actually the basis for identity. And when I mentioned earlier that is about actually engaging the individual customer with their very specific need for that experience, it's a part of a behavioral and psychometric identity that actually maps back to how they transact, where they are, what they're buying, where their place is in the market. All of that comes back to identity management, and payments will have an absolute impact on how we look at digital identity. The thing that we need to remember is identity will be the new capital wealth for our customers. It will no longer be what we have as traditional assets. It will be the data liquidity that we have in terms of who we are and how we act in the market. All of that will then determine our permissions and our ability to transact with others. That goes back to the privacy. And those who have the most private and restrained data, they can actually commercialize that, make money off of it. I should be able to make money off of you authenticating who I am. I shouldn't be giving it away for free. And that will determine my new capital wealth. It's a longer conversation, but keep that in mind. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of the actual value of this. It's not the payment that has value. It's the transactional data. Now, this again is really interesting because operational costs have actually driven most of this to zero in terms of processing a payment after you take into consideration sunk costs, which is another economic argument that I know one economist sitting in the audience who was on stage just a bit earlier, Dagenga, we can discuss this in terms of the actual impact on the model. But what it is, the value is no longer in the payment service, not the service. It's in the data that's actually embedded in that particular transaction. That's where your new value proposition needs to lie, is in the data, not in the service providing. So what does this actually mean for us when we look at, again, additional regulation on GDPR? We can't be anonymous in the system, but anonymity has a direct impact on our actual value, and the anonymity of our data has even more impact on our personal value. This is one of the challenges. Now, when we look at GDPR, which is coming live in May, we also have to look at the liability attached to breaching that privacy. And the current regulation of PSD2, how it actually doesn't correlate with GDPR. It's either going to be, 20 million euro, 4% of your gross turnover for a fine? It's an enormous burden of liability to keep things private. One of the things that makes me laugh the most is when you have a multi-party payment, I initiate a payment, I consent, I authorize it, I give my TPP an opportunity to look at my data. How do we actually manage the receiving party and their consent to have their data shared? It's one of the mechanisms we haven't yet addressed in a fundamental way that covers the liability component for both parties, also including the TPP who's providing it and the bank who has to expose the account information. GDPR is going to add an enormous amount of complexity to this. So, in terms of that, what are some of the new business models that actually come into play here? Well, one of the things that comes to mind is the disintermediation of card providers. Hate to tell you, I think card providers are going to be obsolete unless you find a new way to provide service. Why is this? Let's look at one instance of alternative financing. Point-of-sale financing actually means that a lender or alt-lender can provide that, a bank or alt-lender can provide at the moment of sale. There's no longer a need for someone to manage the credit line differently. So how do you provide that value as a card other than a symbol of a payment? That's one thing. Tokenized payments also can cut out all of the middle players. And we'll talk a little about tokens in a second. TPPs can actually go now direct merchant to bank, merchant to customer directly. There is no need for any of the other players in the value chain because tokens eliminate their role. And processors and acquirers are actually completely cut out precisely because of tokenization. Instant payments don't need clearinghouses. Merchants can get settlements in near real time. There are additional benefits in terms of cash management, liquidity management for them. And we have lower, again, operating costs. And tokenized payments are really phenomenal. They can go customer to business to business, straight through processing. Where do you sit? Where do you provide value when someone has completely cut you out of the chain? one-click e-commerce checkout. They can do micropayments on scale for next to nothing. And tokens can be recycled, and there's a security component to that. They do payment initiation, they do account information retrieval, they can do cash pooling for SMEs and for corporate treasurers, and most importantly, they can do identity verification, or validation, or authentication. And those are really, really important things to remember about the power of putting tokens back into the system or infusing the value chain with tokens and cutting out and disintermediating certain players. So how do we see tokens? And here's some of the things that we need to think about. It's not our behavior, it's actually how we do this, which sounds a little weird, but stick with me. I am such a fan of wearables. I'm lazy. I'm assuming most people are lazy too. Anyone else lazy? That's right, you're my people. Curve has a ring, right? And it's basically tokenized, super easy. I am seriously jealous of the first people who got one because it allows them to literally tap and go. It's NFC, super easy. The other thing is we have tattoos. There are actual gel tattoos that are being looked at. Right now, we don't have them, that they're in development. But let me talk to you about some of the people that are working on these things that are actually quite interesting. And forgive me if I have to read my notes here. MC10 Wearable Interactive Stamp Platform called WISP. It's a breathable, waterproof stamp that uses NFC, and it pairs it to a smartphone and an NFC reader. And when you remove it, you actually can tear it, it breaks the token, it invalidates it. So there's an element of security for that person, the individual, when they think it's at risk, it's destroyed, it can't be read. But imagine having something on your skin that will read it as you go by any NFC reader. You're done. You don't have to pull out anything. You don't have to pull out your smartphone, a card. You don't even have to tap a ring or another wearable or a watch. It's literally right there on your skin. Zip, and you pay. Another one is the New Deal design. They are actually the tech agency behind Fitbit. They have Project Underskin. It's a smart digital tattoo that would be used to scan entry into rooms like Amazon Go. It tracks the body with a biosensor, and it even exchanges information via touch to other underskin tattoos. If you think Amazon Go is cool because you've got some biosensor of you walking through the building, imagine if you had that constantly and how that relates to IoT. Another one from Korea, the Advanced Institute of Science and Technology has created a temporary tattoo from graphene, which is an ultra-thin material. It's both touch and it's touch sensitive and it's flexible, but it also works as a token. All of these things are actually coming live and we're playing with them. And there are some people looking at quite literally embedding tattoos. I've saved a little spot on my wrist for one that will allow us to have all of that token stored biometrically. It is no longer us with our fingerprint or our retinal scan. It is us with something that allows us to be a mobile token, and we are the asset. And that token is us actually moving across the network and being distributed differently. Imagine all of the data that comes with that. You also have social sensitivity data that comes back in terms of your biometrics, my heart rate, my excitement, my anxiety, that actually will be fed to those merchants that are watching me purchase. How quickly do I convert my choices from selecting it to actually paying for it? And you can see that experience of my heart getting super excited about something. You have all of that embedded in the body at this point. So this is where it becomes interesting in terms of how the future tech is actually impacted, and it's also about the investment cycle. And the investment cycle drives what is market ready. If we look at it, there is a massive flux of money coming in at the first part of the cycle. And as companies actually start to prove their concept, prove their value, there's an increase in the amount, but fewer actual investments. And when you raise Series A and Series B, you have fewer and fewer actual number of investments, but an increase in the amount. Now, what's interesting is the money is coming from the East. This is brand new for us. It has a fundamentally different drive. It's backed by e-commerce, and it's got a different ethos in that sense and a different intention of how the money is being distributed and how equity plays out for those who are actually building the emerging tech. European investments, thanks Brexit, I'll leave that alone. I think you know what I mean. The other thing is most of the investments now are private. It's PE, it's not VC. Ant Financial's 2016 raise of $4.5 billion is evidence of that, and the trend is only growing. And then right now, it's not actually about the service in the UX, it's about the regulation. And that's where the investment is being driven in payments. That changes the landscape. So I leave you with this. We're facing a cultural change in where the money is coming from. We're facing it in terms of how we actually behave as we pay, how we use it, the mechanisms we use. We're facing a challenge with the change in the actual business model and the disintermediation of current players because tokenization puts us in direct contact, payer to bank, bank to payer. All of this means we have an opportunity only to find the revenue and sustainability that allows us to exist in different models, and those models require collaboration, not only from a government, a regulatory, a bank, a TPP, and a customer technology consortium. And that's what we'll be discussing today.